Welcome to the Yeoman Podcast. I am your host, Jeff Graham. With me today is Charles Chuck to his friends Marohn, the founder of Strong Towns. Let's see, what can I say about Chuck and Strong Towns? He started the organization in 2008 as a blog, and it has grown through a great effort and with a great deal of help from many, many people, dozens of employees, thousands and thousands of members, to be what I think is the most compelling and important voice in urbanism, land use, the forces that are shaping our built environment, rural environments, the patterns of human settlement. Chuck and Strong Towns, they are two of the reasons that I'm incredibly optimistic for our future, the work that they're doing. On Chuck personally, he is the author, 3 books, is that right, Chuck?
3 books, yeah.
Yeah. Starting in 2019, Strong Towns, a bottom-up revolution to rebuild American prosperity. In 2021, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer. Hopefully we will touch a little bit on that part of his story. And most recently, Escaping the Housing Trap, 2024. He's also the host of the Strong Towns podcast, and has been recognized by Planetism. I don't know how you say Planetism, like Citizen Planetism. You've probably heard of it, as one of the 15 most influential urbanists of all time, yeah. Which is a long time. And I think that's true. I think that's totally true. I would rank him higher.
There's some recency bias there, Jeff.
Maybe. And that's 2 times, I think, 2017 and 2023. He lives in his hometown of Brainerd, Minnesota, with his family. He's married to his high school sweetheart. We are talking now via the junior high, in which he has an office in the kind of redeveloped part of his junior high, which is where he met his wife. And I'll just say to that last thing about the, most influential urbanists, I would say that he is right now, at least in this time that we live in, the message from Chuck Marohn and from Strong Towns is the most important message for our built environment, for our towns, for our rural landscapes. And I'm excited to have Chuck with me. Thank you, Chuck, for joining us.
Thank you, Jeff, my friend. Yeah. That's a high standard to live up to. So I will try to. Yeah. We'll try to do that.
It is delightful. Be a good host here. I was going to start out with a different question, but yeah. Now people say this word all the time. And I've called myself this, but what is an urbanist?
I never call myself that. In fact, I think one of the things that kept me away from the Congress of New Urbanism for a long time was the term new urbanism. I'm not urbanist. To me, like, meant big city person who is obsessed about a big city. And I'm like, I live in a small town. I'm not that. But, in my pursuit of answers to questions I had, I wound up back at CNU over and over and over again. And I wound up with people who describe themselves as urbanists. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'm one of them, perhaps. I feel like the term has applied to me as someone who cares about cities, city form, city life, including big cities, small towns, how, the way we build, design, grow, change, adapt, mature our neighborhoods results in human prosperity and flourishing. I feel like that's kind of maybe my core definition.
Yeah, I share your reservations about that term and use it reluctantly because it feels so kind of siloed or something.
Yeah.
But is there a better term for people who are working to make our human settlement patterns?
Well, okay. Let me start off with a lack of humility.
My brother, whom we both, Chuck knows, Vince, he calls himself a civic artist, kind of tongue in cheek. That's
I like that. I mean, that describes him really well. Okay. Part of my tension is I didn't feel urbanist is a good description. When I first, like 15 years ago, when I'm traveling around and starting to do what eventually would become Strong Towns, when local newspapers would report on me coming to town, they would say smart growth advocates. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not a smart growth advocate. What are you talking? I never mentioned the term. I never talked about it. My wife is in media. My wife is a news reporter, was written back then, does radio now. She said they're just using the term that most closely associates with you. And she said, what do you want them to call you? And I said, I'd like them to call me a Strong Towns advocate. I think 15 years ago, that didn't mean anything. I think today it actually does. So maybe
I'm going to start calling myself that.
Yeah. Like if we're looking for a term, I feel like Strong Towns advocate hopefully will replace urbanist as like the default description for how people want to be known as.
I felt like urbanism, an urbanist is maybe someone who dwells within a city and loves everything that's happening in their city, like is soaking up city life. And that seemed kind of not quite there.
No, it seems if you had to like, okay, if you were doing marketing to an urbanist and you had to describe them in like a superficial way, you'd be like, they like lattes and going to the opera and visiting the museum and, hanging out in the park. And I'm like, I live in a small town. Like I have none of that. Like that's not my experience.
It is, like, to your point, when it has been my experience in just talking about real estate development things. If you talk about urbanism to a small town person, it's kind of alienating.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a sort of a provincial or condescending way. It's like they don't identify with that, and it's alienating to them.
There's a whole lexicon, and it unfortunately like crosses over into our politics and our cultural discussion, which, all those lines are blurred now, of course, in the US today. But there's this whole like lexicon of terms and descriptors and all that are really coded left, progressive, San Francisco, New York, big media, like all that. And that language is kind of just taken for granted by people who live in that sphere as like the sophisticated way to talk about this. But if you get to, I think like the rest of the country, I love to walk from my house downtown and go out to eat. I like to walk to the football field at the high school and watch the Friday night football game. I like to take my dog for a walk through the neighborhood or bike to the grocery store. My church is like literally right across the street from my office. We walk there on Sundays. I think if you just took the experience that I enjoy and dropped it into San Francisco, you would say, oh, Chuck's an urbanist. But, if you take that experience and you put it here and mix it with everybody else who's here, it's a term that doesn't feel like it's the right the anchoring.
Yeah. So, maybe good to elaborate a bit more on Strong Towns. People, if they have followed your work, they may be familiar with this, but you started your professional journey as a civil engineer.
Yeah.
And having worked with civil engineers, particularly in the transportation world, it's often very difficult for someone who wants to build a strong, resilient place. It's sometimes a little antagonistic with the civil engineers. May I ask you what took you from civil engineer to Strong Towns? I'm really asking, like, what radicalized you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was actually like a misfit civil engineer, which won't shock you at all. But so when I was in high school, college, what did I want to do? I wanted to, there were really two things that I would have liked to have done. The first one was get married to my girlfriend who, like we talked about, like I met her literally in this building, this junior high, and we dated through high school and college. And we're married now 30 years. That all worked out. But that was like one ambition that I had that I was serious about. Like I love this woman and wanted to spend time with her. The other ambition I had was really to play music. I'm a drummer. I like percussion.
God, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, man. I had a scholarship to go play music in college, and I was like, this is what I want to do. Those two things didn't reconcile in my brain. And, I'm enough of I grew up on a farm. I'm enough of a like practical person where I even had my dad saying, you can't do music. You have to do something serious, and then you can do music on the side. And ultimately, I knew I was good at math. I did 2 summers in the Army to pay for college because my parents didn't have any money to pay for college. So if I was going to go to college, I was going to have to pay for it by myself. So I joined the Guard. And it was in doing push-ups, at 4 a.m. where I'm like, I got to do something serious. Like I can't go home to my girlfriend, my future in-laws, and say like, I'm going to be a drummer. I mean, what the hell? They wouldn't let me around their daughter. So civil engineering seemed interesting to me because I liked cities. I was always interested in how things were built, how things were laid out. As a kid, I used to draw cities, like pictures of cities and stuff. So civil engineering seemed like a way to take my skill at math and, all the like fundamental things you need and go be an engineer. When I got that job, I liked it. It was fun, problem solving and what have you. But it took me about 3 years to hit the limits of what, like my, my like engineer, like, okay, why are we doing this? And I remember they would call me like Mr. Why. Why do you always ask why we do this? Like, what is it about you? And I would go to these meetings we'd be having, and I'm like, why are we doing this? Like, what is the reason? Why can't we do it this way? After 5 years at an engineering firm, I was like, I've got to do something else or I'm going to go nuts. And a mentor of mine had been talking to me about going to graduate school to get a urban planning degree. And I applied on a whim. I did really well. They let me in. They offered me a big scholarship. And I'm like, well, I'm 26. If I'm going to ever do this, I should do it now. And my wife.
Did y'all have any kids yet?
No, no. And we were actually at the point where we were talking about kids, like maybe now's a good time. And, this opportunity came up and we pivoted. And my wife, is a saint, just very gracious and supporting, said, go do this. And while I was there, I wound up starting my own planning firm, really, working with a few cities around my hometown. And then it grew and grew. And I wound up hiring some of my classmates. And by the time I got done with my graduate program, I had a firm that was approaching $1 million a year. And I had hired a few of my classmates, and we were working all over the state doing mostly small town planning, light engineering kind of stuff. And it was through that process that I, again, was like really enthusiastic. Like we can help a lot of cities. We can make a lot of stuff better. And it took a few years where I started to run into what is going on? Why can I ask what years you were in graduate school? 2000 to 2002. So just the first couple of years at the Humphrey School here in the University of Minnesota. I
was trying to think about what was going on in the academic
9/11.
Zeitgeist in the 9/11. Yeah.
Right in the middle.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So that was like a big, it was a big mental shift. I mean, it's funny because I've got, a 21-year-old kid who has, historic memory of 9/11, but not the mental shift that we all went through when you lived through that. But yeah, that was the period of time. So my first kid was born in 2004, and I had been out of graduate school a year and a half. And
we're I think we're exactly, are we the same age?
I'm 52. Yeah.
Yeah. We're my oldest is 21. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it was actually a process in running my own firm where, I got to the point I would show up to these meetings. I think this is like the vignette. I would show up to a meeting as the planner, and the engineer would show up with some stupid plan. Like, we're going to spend $1.2 million running sewer and water systems and roads all over the place. And it's a small town with a budget of like $800,000. And we're going to spend, it would be as if like the city of Minneapolis just dropped randomly like $10 billion on a project, like proportionate to their budget. It's just nuts. Like, we're just going to do this. And everyone would nod and be like, okay. And then I would say, okay, here's the tax base you're going to get from this. You can't even pay the interest on the debt, let alone retire the debt, let alone maintain any of this. If you get the tax base that you're hoping, which is also like a gamble and a risk. And I was told a number of times to just shut up and do my job. Your job is to review the permits. Your job is to do planning. Your job is not to do the engineering, and your job is not to do the financial work. And after going through that like a number of times, I won't say that it radicalized me, but it got me to where by 2006 and 2007, as the housing market, because we were on the very front end of the housing market, my company was, before you can default on a house, you have to build it.
Yeah.
Before you can build it, you got to come to us. And
You're
so
a leading indicator.
We were a leading indicator, and my business cratered. I mean, we went from $1 million in revenue to 300,000 between 2006 and 2008. So it was just like gutting this thing that I had built. And by the time we got to 2008, I was mad. I've been telling cities, this is really stupid. Like, you're going to pay. This is not going to work out. And then it didn't work out. It collapsed. And then the cities kind of said, well, the last thing we need is a big mouth consultant telling us how we screwed up. And so I lost half my contracts.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I sat down and started to write. And I wrote, if you've ever, been to a therapist or talked to someone who has, a lot of times they'll recommend journaling. And I love writing anyway. And I thought, well, this is cheaper than therapy. I'm not going to go to the therapist. I'm just going to write what I'm seeing. And so I said, I'm going to write 3 days a week. And that's what I did. And that was the beginning of Strong Towns. And it was really my way of getting what were kind of angry, frustrated thoughts coalesced and out in a coherent way where I could explain them to people, understand them fully myself, and then ultimately, wasn't my plan, but ultimately have other people interact with them.
Mm-hmm. So kind of to recap, grew up on a farm.
Yeah.
In a small town. When
I say farm, Jeff, the homestead that was homesteaded by my great-great-grandparents. So
wow.
Not a big factory farm, like a today you might call it a hobby farm, although that's right. what we fed ourselves with. So that was, my dad worked at the mill and got hurt and couldn't go back. And so he actually went to school for a few years while I was growing up and became a teacher. So when I was in 6th grade, he started teaching 5th grade.
So that's good that you missed him as a teacher.
It's very good. Yeah. That would not have, even in the same building, would not have worked out well.
Yeah. I can imagine. So kind of rural America, small town America, get into, become a civil engineer, have a creative bent, and are in a position to be consulting to advising in some capacity small towns on their infrastructure and what they should do, starting to see like, hey, this stuff doesn't make financial sense. Everybody's like, you're crazy, just do the job. And began a blog during the great, financial apocalypse of 2008. And that led to Strong Towns. A question in there that I didn't get was, you are an accomplished or an impressive economic thinker. Like, where is your curiosity for economics come from? Because it weaves into, I feel like it's the thing that most people just don't even get. Economics and finance, I should say, like that sort of thing. Is it just like, oh, I read some books, or is there more to it than that?
Not a lot more to it than that.
Yeah.
But I think maybe the intensity of it is what is different. So as an engineer, you take a course in engineering economics, which is not like, oh, here's Keynesianism and here's the Austrian school. It's none of that. It's like, here's how a project cash flows. Here's what you can salvage things at the end. Here's over a 25-year life what the net present value is. And so to me, like my economics background was a very practical, site-oriented
accounting.
It was closer to accounting than it was economics. Yeah. When I was in what I would say is like the early phase of discontent with the planning firm that I had started, like, why is this not, like, why are we being asked to work on these why are these projects not working? I realized that I didn't have the language to explain what my gut was feeling. And so I did a number of things. Like one thing I did is I just turned on CNBC. I bought a subscription, which was actually kind of expensive back then, a streaming subscription to CNBC. It was like $80 a month that I didn't have just to stream that one channel from my computer. And I just, every time there was a phrase that was uttered or a term that was uttered, I would write it down and try to figure out what it meant. Like the idea that bond values go down when interest rates, change. I'm like, what, why? Like why does that, what's the relationship? And so I started to dig into that. And at the same time, I'm a bit of an obsessive reader. Maybe that's an understatement. I'm an obsessive reader. And so I spent probably 2 to 3 years reading 30, 40 economics books a year, just different people who had different takes on different things regarding economics. I mean, you and I have bonded over, Nassim Taleb and how much we like his writing. I think his was part of a larger group of people that I was reading, but I found his stuff to be probably the most inspirational in terms of the questions I was asking, because it dealt with uncertainty and risk and, what we actually know and don't know and the limits of what we can know. To me, those were the things that, that whole political economic debate that we have is kind of silly when you actually get down to a project in a city, or you actually get down to, the way we run things in a local government. And that's what I was interested in, is like, how does this stuff actually work? Like, how does a balance sheet work? How does public accounting work? Why can cities run balanced budget every year, but be in like huge amounts of debt? Like, these things didn't make sense. And I just kept digging until I figured them out to my satisfaction.
Something I love about that, you and y'all's work at Strong Towns, is you're injecting into the conversation something about the human settlement pattern, about how we build, how we pay for what we build, or how we build. This question of, well, how do we pay for it? How does it get paid for? What's going to happen when we can't pay for it anymore? And it's a topic that I feel like a lot of kind of, you might broadly call them environmental advocates or urbanists or like whatever you want to call the sort of group, or who tend to be waving the flag. Like, I don't see the sort of Just Stop Oil people or whatever. I don't see them saying like, well, we really need to look at how we're financing this, but I feel like if people began to view so much of what we do through that lens, then the problems we're facing with our human settlement pattern will become much clearer, and the solutions will become more obvious too, or at least the direction we need to go. They're very complicated at this point, so probably not obvious.
It was, so I've come a long way since those early days in terms of understanding. I think having a better understanding of human motivation. I mean, I had another crisis like this where I spent probably 3 years reading psychology books, just trying to understand like human psychology and group psychology. Like, why do we react the way we do? But the early frustration was I would run into these people who would say they were fiscally conservative, and they didn't really even care to investigate the math. There was just this underlying belief that like, if we were growing, it was good. And then there was another group that claimed to be kind of like anti-growing, but they were not anti-growing because it didn't make sense. They were anti-growing because, like no oil, no, environmental, like, and I found both of these conversations to be completely incoherent in a way that was, at first like maddening to me. And that's ultimately why I ended up in the psychology stuff. I'm like, why? These are smart people. Like, why do they think this way?
Yeah.
But when I was in the economics phase, I was like, okay, I'm kind of a kindred spirit with the person who is saying we should be pro growth and we should be in making investments and we should be prudent about what we're doing. I'm kind of aligning with the outcomes that the people who are anti-growth want, because they're like, this is a dumb project. Why are we doing this? But I don't feel like I have the same inspiration as them. Like, I'm not motivated by the same things. Why am I winding up in this place? And the math was kind of comforting to me because I remember showing up to one meeting where the city was going to build this industrial park, and they had already built an industrial park, and they were convinced it had done really well. It's all built out. It's great. We're going to build the same thing on land we own right next door. And I showed up with the math. I'm like, here's how the existing industrial park is performing. You gave a tax subsidy to every single business that was in here, except for the public ones that you just gave the land away for free. So you are making no money off this park, and you're calling it a success because the lots are full. Like what kind of performative thing is that? And that was actually a moment where I looked around the table and I said this out loud after the meeting was over, and it was not taken well. I looked around the room and I'm like, you're making money off this transaction. You're making money off this transaction. You're making money off this transaction. Everybody in here in this room gets paid if the project goes forward. None of us get paid if the project is successful. And to me, that was like a big, like, wake up moment. Like, okay, I get the motivated reasoning on why we don't ask these questions, and why when I bring them up, it's like I'm, releasing a stink bomb in the room. Everybody's like, oh, Chuck, we don't want him at our meeting. We don't want him there, because these were questions that had obvious answers that no one wanted to grapple with.
How did, when you say it wasn't received well, what was that
was
like?
A city where I started to get not invited to meetings that I should have been at. And then ultimately, when my contract came up at the end of the year, they opted to downsize the department.
Was this post Strong Towns or pre Strong Towns?
Yeah, this would be 2008, 2009. So like right in the time when I'm starting to write this stuff. Yeah.
Well, on that sort of dislocation between,
I'm explaining how I'm a bad businessman.
I mean, you have, I don't know this for sure, but my perception is you have this terrible curse where you need people to be accurate and clear-eyed. Like, you want people to understand what's happening.
I think if I had a moral virtue that I would brag about, it is that I can't live in the dissonance of getting paid to do things that I think are not good.
Yeah.
And oftentimes to be a consultant, you have to be okay with that.
You're put in that position.
Yes. Yeah. And I was never good at that, right? Like I had to believe in what I was doing.
That's, I do want to kind of get onto some other things, but just as a tangent, my observation is that's really, really common among entrepreneurs and small business owners. Like and partly like why they're doing what they're doing is they make themselves kind of unemployable. That attribute might lead them to be unemployable. It's not across the board like everybody who starts a business is that way, but they kind of have their values that they want to live, their values, and it's hard for them to put themselves in a position where they need to, do the, I'm blanking on his name, the guy that it's hard to get a man to see something that his paycheck depends upon him not seeing.
Upton Sinclair. Yeah.
Upton Sinclair, yeah.
Can I actually take it a step further? I actually think there is resentment that often grows amongst people who opt for the other choice, right? In 2004, when Chloe, my oldest, was born, the city here adjacent to the one I live in now, the one where my family homestead is in, it's a city called Baxter, had their city planner job open. And it was like 80, 100,000 a year, something like that. It was way more money, like many multiples of what I had ever made and many more multiples of what I would make until like 2 or 3 years ago. Like I would have been making in 2004 what would have been good money. I would have had few night meetings. I would have had, kind of a simple job, but it would have been the yoke of doing stuff that I found very non-redeeming, like, being the planner for the next phase of the Walmart and Costco and frontage road expansion. And I remember going for a long walk with my wife and having this conversation about it. And, I felt this responsibility because we had this kid to actually do something that would make money, because my consulting firm had been, in the early days, very up and down. Like 1 month we were doing well. And then the next month it's like, oh my gosh. And when you hire people, you lose money for like a couple months before they become, billable and all that. It was a question of responsibility for me to my family. And my wife, again, a saint, said, you can't do that. You have to, you can't do it. You will be miserable and not a good dad and not a good husband. Don't do it. And, I have a ton of admiration and respect for her because, while I think we live like a beautiful lifestyle, it's not one where we've made tons of money over the last couple of decades, but it has been one where we've had a lot of peace and, reconcile the things you're passionate about with the things you get up and do every day.
Well, in terms of not everything that can be measured matters and not everything that matters can be measured.
That's a good life.
The impact of the work is enormous. I would say you had mentioned about resentment, and I thought you were going to take it in a different direction than you did. But you were saying that there's resentment that fosters resentment being in that environment. Can you elaborate on that, or did I miss part of that?
No. I feel like there is so Nassim said in one of his books, and he's said a number of times, we should be building statues to entrepreneurs because they're like the soldiers who go out and risk death and often are slaughtered, the
odds are stacked against them. They're like,
yes, the odds are stacked against them.
Yeah, and no same person would ever pursue that path.
Yes. I do think that a lot of times, because I work a lot with government and, there is a certain amount of, I use the word resentment, and I actually think that is the right word. But I feel like a lot of people make the decision for very practical reasons. Like, I want to pay my mortgage. I want to, go on vacation. I want to take the path that goes against their own inner inspiration, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And, we're 52 now. I mean, you can look around at the people who have been at that now for a couple of decades of their life. And when I get together with friends or get together with people that I know or run into people that I know that are at that, how you doing? Oh, it's the old grind. It's the, da, 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 da. How are you? Wow, Chuck, you've made it. It's like, you're doing great. And I'm like, well, my life earnings and your life earnings are way different, and mine are not nearly as high as yours. But yeah, like, my happiness is probably way higher, and my job satisfaction is probably way higher. And, I am making, like, I'm not complaining about my salary. I'm making decent money now. We've grown this to the point where it's pretty stable, and I can pay myself, the board pays me a decent, a competitive salary. But, you still have that, underlying resentment of where you're at today without the recognition of what it took to be here and what trade-off you have to make. And maybe I'm just more aware of it because of the age cohort I'm in. But I often advise our younger people on the team here. Like, if you buy a house, you're buying the need to be stable. And the need to be stable means you might have to make different career choices. So, just have that in mind, Can
I ask?
Does that make sense?
It totally does. Yeah. Yeah, it does. I do think you're kind of invoking Nassim's observations about entrepreneurs is a great one. They're kind of artists in a way. Or many of them, not all certainly, but many of them are artists. I want to shift gears and ask you something about what an observation you made about Jane Jacobs and Robert Moses, and I'll also ask you maybe for people who aren't familiar with those historical figures, ask you to explain a little bit about who they are. But you have said, and I think this gets to the core of a problem you and I both have with a lot of what happens in the kind of the planning profession. You've said you can't achieve Jane Jacobs' ends via Robert Moses' means. And can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Didn't you also, you and I got into a vibe on Twitter a while back, governing like Caesar with Jesus in mind?
That sounds like something I would have chatted about. I'd probably have too many things on there. But yeah.
So to me, it is like the fatal recognition that I think the planning profession fails to struggle with. And even offshoot to that, people who I'm good friends with in the new urbanism and what have you, I think struggle with this as well. Because there's this idea that we're really smart people, we know the answers, and people should just empower us to do the thing we know how to do. And, Robert Moses, as he was originally the parks director in New York and ultimately became, I don't even know what his title was, but he is the guy who, in a sense, engineered the highways through not just New York City, but all across New York State. The kind of grand planner and mobilizer of people and resources and money and institutions.
It's kind of probably beginning in the 1930s, I guess, or was it prior to that?
Yeah, beginning then and then accelerating after World War II with urban renewal and all that. When you think about reshaping cities around the automobile, Robert Moses is kind of the archetype. I do think that the engineering profession, even though, I never learned about Robert Moses in engineering school, I think his kind of thinking is embodied in what we're taught in engineering school, which is, we got to solve a problem. There needs to be traffic flow from here to here, or there needs to be a sewer extension out to here. And the way you solve the problem, sometimes you got to rip stuff down and tear it apart. And that's good because we can reshape the city in a new form. we're so much smarter now. We know things they didn't know back when they originally built this neighborhood, and we can tear it down and do it right this time. Jane Jacobs would be the antithesis of that. And Jane Jacobs is very much, I feel like, and I don't think she would say this, and I don't think many of the like Jane Jacobs acolytes would say this, but I feel like there's a Chesterton's fence aspect to Jane Jacobs.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah, and Chesterton's fence is, we come across a fence, it seems to serve no purpose, let's tear it down. And Chesterton's fence would say, well, you should probably spend some time trying to figure out what the purpose of it is before you tear it down. Or if you do tear down a small part first and then see what happens before you rip out the whole thing.
Why do you say you don't think she would like that? Why?
She might. It's so interesting because it's hard to read Jane Jacobs today through the lens of modern progressive thought, because she is a bastion of modern progressivism. When I read her, especially her writings on economics are basically like Austrian school economics. And I
like kind of Austrian school with a sprinkling of soul. And like love.
I would say localism, right? Like, love and soul is a good, like the bottom up grounding. There's a lot of humility there. There's a lot of like, okay, I don't know exactly why this is this way, but here's what I observe. What I love most about Jane Jacobs is how she reasons not through theory and, let me apply this like grand vision to micro things. She starts with the micro and kind of almost hunts for the weird exception and then says, what does this explain? It's very like Darwinian scientific method. Like, okay, I'm going to observe 200 different turtles and then try to figure out like what this one that is different is explaining about the rest. And how do I recognize, this is Jane Jacobs.
She has a little book on that. That is like The Nature of Economies is her, I think, penultimate book.
Yep.
And it's exactly about that.
I remember I was reading one of her books I was assigned in grad school, and it had a whole chapter where she just like eviscerated the Federal Reserve and the idea of like top down finance. And like, I think she even said some line like, we've spent trillions on economists like fantasy experiments about how the world should work. I'm like, oh my gosh, what would she think about what we've done today? Because that was written in the 70s. But
I have been going down rabbit holes of like people writing in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, alarmingly writing then. Like this is where it goes. Like we can't keep doing this. And like, whoa, boy. Well, if you only knew.
I've done that too. The thing that I've tried to reconcile with today, and this really comes out of my experience in 2008, is I'm in that same mindset. Like, we can't keep doing this, but people have been saying that for 70 years and we've done it for 70 years. And so could we do it for another 70 years? That would be the rest of my life plus some. It's possible we could. Like, I don't think it's likely, but it's possible. So Jane Jacobs grounds us in a certain humility that to me was very familiar and comfortable when I started to wrestle with it. The idea of we should want things to change and get better, but we should start as our basis a humble understanding of where we're at now and how we got here. And we should work, in a sense, with the next increment of change and let humanity respond to that and, basically react to what we're doing and use that to inform whether we're right or not, or whether we know what we're doing or not. I think this is the big schism, right? Mentally in most planners' brains, we're going to do a comprehensive plan and we're going to set out a vision and we'll listen to people. Sure, we'll have public meetings and we'll go through a whole visioning process. But at the end of the day, like, we're really smart. We're going to get the smartest people we know in a room. We're going to say, this is how it should be. And we're going to lay that out. And then we're going to like kind of stubbornly cling to it or hold up that stubbornness as a virtue as we go forward in time. And to me, I think that brand of planning, that brand of city building needs to die. It could not die quickly enough, like needs to go away and be a vestige of the past. That's 95% of the planning profession today.
Yeah. I had a back and forth a few months ago with would call this person kind of an urbanist in the broad term, who was extremely celebratory of Napoleon and Baron von Osman's redevelopment of Paris.
Right.
And it's like, it's great. And this person's position was, we need a lot more of that. We need a lot more of we need, what is the make big plans.
If the urban renewal people weren't inspired by the same thing, right?
And that was my reply. I was like, well, that's actually what got us into this mess, was big blast radius, technocratic, top-down imposition. And we had a big disagreement about it, but there was no room for, my sense was that we both share an affinity for the Jane Jacobs end. But this planner has a great love for the Robert Moses means, and was just like, the response was, the problem with all the urban renewal stuff, everything that's happened in the 1900s, many things that are happening still, is the technocrats weren't smart enough. We just needed smarter technocrats. We need people like Osman. If we can only find those people and give them the power, then everything will work out. And I'm like, we don't really know what Paris was like. Like the old cool medieval parts of Paris, they're really cool. They're pretty awesome. And there are a great many cities all over the world that are still very medieval, that are pretty cool and work really well. Are we sure that Osman's impact was positive? And are we sure that providing the smartest people with the technocratic control over everything is really going to have a good result? And I think we just were speaking past each other. There was no getting there. But to your point, like, I do think that's 95% of the people in the profession. I think it's changing. School, I think 5 years ago it was 98%.
I'll give you that. I do think, I feel like Mike Lydon with the technical urbanism stuff has done more to kind of just shake up the conversation. It was amazing because going through graduate school, I was, 5 years older than everybody else. Everybody else had done their undergrad and then they went to graduate school. And the cool thing about a planning degree is that people come from all over. So we had people who had art degrees and literature degrees and political science degrees and like economics. They were coming from all different professions and they wind up in urban planning. To a person, they all, if you would have asked any of them, what's your highest like career aspiration, would have been to build a city from scratch. Because to build a city from scratch, I can make it in my own vision. I can do it perfect.
Yeah.
It will be way better than any that's ever come before. Because I am more informed, more intelligent, more thoughtful, than everybody who's come before. And I can do this in a better way. And I don't think that is as much like arrogance and hubris of like the soul as it is of the time, right? Like there's this, because we're on this progression of progress, like, when we were kids, we had the Apple II computer and then we had PC compatibles. And then we had, oh my gosh, we don't have 24 baud internet. We've got cable modems. And then pretty soon you've got an entire like world in your pocket with a smartphone. People who have lived through that progress, I think just naturally think they are smarter and more informed than everybody who came before them because they have, I can look up right now who won the World Series and was the MVP in any year in history. Of course, I know more than anybody who came before me. I've got this in my pocket. Like I can just look it up. I think what lacks and really what the urban planning profession lacks is what I would just call like the teaching of humility. I feel like I have an advantage because I grew up Catholic, and there's a personification. There's a caricature of Catholicism where it's like nuns slapping you on the wrists with rulers. But a big part of Catholicism is a humility about, the thousands of years of practice that have come before. And in a sense, submitting to that without fully understanding it as a path to some greater form of being. That's actually a hard leap to make in a society where, wow, the smart people, like everything keeps getting better and better and better. It's way easier to believe in your own innate superiority over the backward Luddite people of pick your time frame ago, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Can I
add one other thing about the Jane Jacobs,
Please.
Robert Moses thing?
Yeah.
Because you asked me about, wanting Jane Jacobs ends with Robert Moses means. One of the things that I find like have the greatest dichotomy is when people read like The Death and Life of Great American Cities, and they'll cite the Sidewalk Ballet. And like Jane Jacobs was all about sidewalk. She wrote this whole thing about the Sidewalk Ballet. And the takeaway is like, we need to build sidewalks. And so they will come away with, we need a plan for sidewalks. We need standards. We need implementation plan. We need to come up with like, here's how we're going to, we'll spend $2 million this year and $4 million next year. And here's our overall sidewalk plan. And they'll go and implement it. And they think they're doing Jane Jacobs because they read Sidewalk Ballet as sidewalk. Jane Jacobs, if she would have like put one word in bold and one word in tiny subscript, sidewalk would have been tiny and ballet would have been bold capital letters like this, because a ballet is like a dance back and forth. Right? It's like movement, and it's not one director. It's actually multiple people working in concert with each other. And when she talks about a sidewalk ballet, she's really talking about the complexity of humanity. If we were going to do sidewalks by Jane Jacobs, we would go out and, we got a 4-step process at Strong Towns that is kind of modeled on this idea. We would go out and humbly observe where people are struggling. We would then say, okay, well, this struggle here is really related to the fact that there's a gap in the sidewalk or the sidewalk's broken. Let's go fix that. Let's go deal with that now. And then they would repeat that process over and over again. It is in a sense like the same underlying inspiration, sidewalk ballet, but the implementation emphasizes one word or the other. And I think our planners would like to implement that. The Robert Moses in us wants to implement sidewalks, where the Jane Jacobs in us should really be emphasizing ballet.
To riff on that a little bit, does the Robert Moses in us want to emphasize sidewalk formation marching? Or a marching band, kind of some sort of antithesis of ballet?
I think it is it is. This, we have made efficiency a cultural virtue of America. And I do think Robert Moses implicitly taps into the efficiency virtue in a way that we don't culturally really question all that much. Of course, we would do that efficiently, right?
Can I, this is maybe a turn. I would like us to be able to talk in our time together. I'd like us to be able to talk about monetary policy.
Okay.
And that sounds like maybe elite, but it relates to the efficiency thing. I think that Robert Mosesism is performative efficiency. I would say that it's an infatuation with top-down planning as a means to achieve efficiency. But it's clearly the opposite of that. Like even Ivan Illich's thing about counterproductivity, and when you add up all the time that you spend working to money to buy your car, and then buying gas, and then sitting in traffic, and going, you add up all that, and you add it together, and what's your real time, your real speed of travel? It's 4 miles an hour, which is, about what you can do with a horse trotting along. And I feel like there's a lot of, like, in the Robert Mosesian thing, I would like to talk to you about these grand ambitious plans to be imposed down, and how they get enabled, facilitated, supported, financed with public debt, and given how our monetary policy is set up. I feel like you're the person who can talk about this cogently, so no pressure. So, what's your initial reaction to that?
Okay, let me give you an insight and an analogy. Strong Towns, we have 6,500 members, which are like individuals who have donated to us in the last year. A lot of them are $5 a month, small donations. When we have surveyed our members, what we find is that there's a really weirdly high percentage, 5%, 6%, that are computer programming people who do computer programming. And I have found this is not like the tech bro. Like, this is I deal with computers and programming and what have you. And the way they're finding us is not because they love urbanism, although a lot of them live in cities. The reason they find us so compelling is because of that bottom-up iterative approach. If you go back to computer programming 30 years ago, it was Robert Moses. It was get smart people, write code, pound through things, debug, figure it out. And what happened is that was seen as like the most efficient way to do things. When you get to modern coding, what you're really talking about is something that's more evolutionary. And I think we're all starting to get a glimpse of this with AI now, where you'll say, okay, we're here and we're trying to get to here. We're going to have 1,000 different algorithms running at the same time, trying to figure this out. And then we'll look at the 1,000 different ones and kind of figure out which one works best. And then we'll take that one and we'll iterate that one to the next level. Or we'll take like the 5% of them and iterate those up. What you are doing is you are not, in a sense, like bulk trying to like ram your way through it with resources and effort and, human power and what have you. You're using the machine to kind of like let it grow and let it figure out. Again, it's a lot more like Darwin and evolution sped up than it is like top down God coming in saying, I'm creating, camels with 2 humps. And, I think that the mindset of the programmer is actually more attuned to the way cities are well built and effectively built and should be built, the modern programmer than the programmer of like 40 years ago would be. And of course, those programmers of 40 years ago are gone because they got wiped out and taken over by the new version. If we switch to monetary policy, I think that I always feel like hesitant talking about this because as soon as I mention it, I'm going to get you and I will both get inundated, maybe depending on your audience, with people who have their own theories of how money works and money is a construct and we can just do, okay, whatever. I feel like the monetary system we have today is run and managed by people who would be the computer programmer of 40 years ago, which is, I'm really smart. I'm going to pound my way through this. We've got a problem. Oh, here's our toolkit, lower interest rates. Oh, we've got a hiccup over here. Oh, here's our toolkit, print money. I have ideas of what a modern computer programming language, like an evolution kind of system would look like, but it would look very, very different than the one we've set up. The one we've set up is designed to me to scale a big top-down economy without nuance. And I do think that works for a short period of time. And so you get in a sense, efficiency. But then what I think what I would say, I think you would agree, you get this fragility trade-off. And what happens is the cycles start to get crazier, right? Like the bigger amplitude craziness, and the crash is crazier. And so the rescue is crazier. And to measure that inefficiency is measuring it's measuring one variable without the other. It's measuring efficiency without fragility or without risk or without volatility. It's just saying this is efficient. And it is efficient. You know, when we get right now we're doing quantitative easing again. Why? Inflation is above target. You know, unemployment is low. The stock market's booming. We're doing it because it all feels fragile underneath. And there's a fear that if we don't do it, that the whole thing will crash. The idea that the whole thing could crash as here we've got 3 doors. Door number 1, prosperity. Door number 2, stagnation. Door number 3, total market failure. The idea that we would have a system where door number 3 is one of the possibilities, and a serious possibility that we would need to print lots of money in current situation to avoid, to me, it's like saying, I'm searching for an analogy. It's like saying, okay, we're going to open this door. One door is health and prosperity. The next door is we struggle through life. And the next door is you're going to get mauled by a grizzly bear. Go ahead. You got 1 out of 3 chance. I'm I don't want to play that game. That's not a
right.
It's not a game I want to play. That's what our economy is right now from a macroeconomic standpoint. I don't know where you wanted to take that, but
I think that's a good setup. I was wanting to get technical, which is maybe not all that interesting, but it's something it's been a bee in my bonnet.
Go ahead, and then I got a technical thing for you.
Okay. I want to hear that, but I'll share my sense of things. When people I feel like people just look at the world as it is. You know, we go get in our car and we drive down the highway and we go do these things. And then we we go to the grocery store and we buy our food that was grown in California or maybe Mexico or maybe even further afield. And then we drive home and we do all these sorts of things. And they're just that's how it is. It just happened. That's the natural evolution of commerce and prosperity and people working together. And it has created a landscape like this where you drive maybe to the Dollar General or the Super Walmart or the Publix. And maybe if you're on a road trip somewhere, you might drive by, some big giant Monsanto field of something. And my sense is that's just not a natural thing. This didn't happen just naturally. Humans left to our own devices, living with gravity, like real forces in our lives, gravity and physics. That's not what would happen. It's actually, we would continue to progress. We would continue to innovate. We would have, innovations that help us lead better, more prosperous, more flourishing lives. But this scale thing of giant, massive organizations shipping stuff all over, it just wouldn't work that way. My hypothesis is that the monetary policy we've had now for well over 100 years, but especially so for the last 40 or 50 or so, is such that it creates advantage to the 2 things. It creates a special advantage to those with access to capital so they can do bigger things. And then from a public spending perspective on infrastructure, it has the public, the state, our governments, spending things to build really, really big things that I think Strong Towns articulates in really good ways. Hey, these don't pencil. And doing it with money that it is taken from the future, taken from an unconsenting future it is operated outside of gravity in the world of physics. Like it's not bound by real things. So the scale of stuff gets so giant and enormous. And so that is my sense, my hypothesis, that these problems of modernity, most of them that we really scrutinize, we wonder about, their root cause is this move from monetary policy induced move from a low time preference society to a high time preference society where external costs are externalized all the time. So I want to be able to say that in like one sentence, but it took me that long to say that. So what's your reaction to
that? I totally agree. And let me put some meat on it, because I feel like there's two examples that just jump out at me. I'm obsessed with Dunkin' Donuts. Mm-hmm. And I'm obsessed with Dunkin' Donuts, not because I like love Dunkin' Donuts. I like their butternut donut. It's kind of weird. We don't get them here in Minnesota, but, Dunkin' Donuts is a corporation that we all know, we've all heard of, we've all seen. But if you step back and you look at like, what does Dunkin' Donuts do? It does like coffee and drinks, and it does donuts. Creating donuts and coffee is like the ultimate startup entrepreneur thing. Mm-hmm. If you go to immigrant communities that are dominated by immigrants, there's always like local donut shops all over the place, because it's like the easiest business to start. You need a deep fryer. You need some dough. You need a display case and a cash register. Like really, like it is, you can do this on like borrowed money from in the mattress. Like this is a really cheap business to start. So why is there a need for Dunkin' Donuts? And why does Dunkin' Donuts exist when so many local competitors to undercut them in price would be possible? Mm-hmm. So I was over in the neighborhood next to us. We have a Dunkin' Donuts here in town, which started like 2 years ago or a year ago. When Dunkin' Donuts came to Minnesota, they made this announcement. We're starting 50 franchises in Minnesota. If you want to be a franchisee, get a hold of us. Here's the requirements. And one of the requirements was you have to have $500,000 of liquid net worth. And you have to have like $2 million total net worth. There were like some numbers that were clearly not like, if you take the immigrant startup person on this end and the Dunkin' Donuts franchisee on the other, these are two different, like one cannot be the other, right? So Dunkin' comes in and they get their, high net worth investor. They start the franchise up. And then what they do is they make really good use of the transportation network that we built them. The Dunkin' up the street, I saw the other day, had a semi outside delivering their franchise package of stuff, right? Like here's your refresher stuff, and here's your coffee, and here's your donuts frozen that you thaw, or like whatever it is. They don't make things there. They get it all delivered in and then they prepare it. The guy getting on, this was a full tractor trailer. I mean, this was like a big, huge thing parked in the alley. The guy who got off was wheeling a two-wheeler full of stuff. Like that was a delivery for that store. That person, I'm assuming, is going to get in a truck and drive to the next Dunkin' and the next Dunkin' and the next Dunkin'. And their day is spent starting at a warehouse and then going door to door and dropping off small, basically like pickup size deliveries to all these different Dunkin's on a massive truck. Why can they do that? They can do that because the state has built this massive interstate system. They not only allow it to be clogged with Dunkin' level trucks, but that's actually like the design. That's what it's there for. When you get off the interstate system, we have built this massive trillions and trillions of dollars worth of local roadways to allow them to get across town as quickly as possible with minimal conflict. We have taken all of our local streets and we've widened them out for semi-tractor trailers, even though like little kids walk across here to school. And like we as local taxpayers are paying for 10 feet of roadway that we don't need and don't use except so that Dunkin' can get their delivery or McDonald's can get their delivery or what have you. And so you look at it like over and over and over again. every part of the system becomes like incrementally more expensive in ways that don't provide any benefit to that immigrant starting the donut place, but provide immense amount of competitive advantage to the Dunkin' Donuts. And we call that efficiency because now you can have one warehouse and they can source from a handful of farmers the materials they need, and they can make the supply chain really efficient. Okay. That's all the stuff we do on the ground to benefit one over the other. And it costs all of us, not just in tax dollars and debt, but it costs us in like the community is actually worth less because you got a highway out in front of your house as opposed to like a local street where people would walk business to business, or, it makes our communities less valuable. Now, add on to that the fact that 2020, we have a pandemic and the stock market starts to drop because Dunkin' Donuts, is not having people come to their donut place. So what do? We got to give them money. We got to bail them out. I wrote a whole article about the Cheesecake Factory. The Cheesecake Factory literally got Federal Reserve bailout money, like tens of millions of dollars in money to keep them afloat because they're listed on the stock exchange and we can't have their stock go down. We actually have to bail them out. It's not because you can't get a hamburger locally. It's not because people love the Cheesecake Factory. It's because they're part of this system. We can wipe out every immigrant donut place. We can wipe out every local hamburger joint. But we can't let go of Dunkin' Donuts and we can't let go of Cheesecake Factory because they are systematic part of this top-down efficient economy that we bless with cheap financing and a backstop and all of this like monetary infusion whenever they run into a difficult time. That fragile model should have disappeared multiple times in our lifetime because it did not work. And yet we have stepped in and rescued it to the detriment of all the bottom-up entrepreneurs that should be existing today in our ecosystem, providing services and goods and things that people need. Instead, those people can all go work for Dunkin' Donuts. And by the way, they'll have a 401k plan, so they'll be better off. And that is
Dunkin' is coming to create jobs.
Dunkin's coming to create jobs.
Yeah.
And to me, that's always I had a guy who ran a grocery store. I didn't get along with him. I didn't really like him, but he was a local entrepreneur that ran like a small grocery store in town. And this is a city that I was working in. And a big chain grocery store came to town. And everybody was so quick to like crap on the local entrepreneur and they give $800,000 of tax subsidy to the new grocery store. The state like widened the highway, made like all kinds of, changes to accommodate them. There's all this stuff. We rolled out the red carpet for this big box grocer. And, people locally were like, this is progress. This local grocer just couldn't compete. He couldn't make it. And the guy ultimately went to work. I saw him one night. He was working at Walmart because he his business went out of business. He needed a job to take care of his family. He was working like the night shift at Walmart as a manager. To me, there's a certain, and I don't want to make this a political argument, but there's a certain, I think, paternalistic, like progressive-esque, but sometimes conservative-esque, like top-down paternalistic idea that, the guy's better off because he doesn't have to run this business and be, worried about payroll next month. He can just work for a stable corporation, have a 401k, have a good retirement, have his life taken care of, and everything will be good. And I looked in this guy's eyes and I saw a lesser human being. And it made me sad.
Sadness.
Yeah.
I think about that. I mean, that was the story of the pandemic, like super compressed, outstanding for like the biggest restaurant chains, an absolute bloodbath for small businesses.
Absolute bloodbath.
I think about exactly that. I drive through. I've written about this a little bit from time to time. My mother's hometown. She grew up outside of Blairsville, Georgia, which makes it a very, very small place, Choistoy Valley. And when I was a little kid, like vibrant Main Street, all these kinds of things. And now when you drive through on the highway that sort of goes around the town, it's Dunkin' Donuts. I bought some of their bacon things there at that Dunkin' Donuts and Hardee's, and it's not every business on that new Main Street is a financialized transnational corporation. And people are just like, well, that's just how it is. That's progress. I'm like, I don't know that doesn't seem like progress to me. Instead of all these small business owners living in and operating within their community and employing their neighbors, now they all work for a distant, faceless group that has no. But the argument is like, yeah, consumer prices are low, but are they really? Like when you add it all up, are they really?
Well, I just looked up my article on the Cheesecake Factory because it's been like 5-6 years since I wrote this. I forgot they had spent in the 4 years prior to the pandemic, they had spent $425 million buying back their own shares, which and I know is a way to take cheap money because interest rates were near zero then, to take cheap money because they took on $1.6 billion in debt during the same period of time, to take cheap money, buy back your shares, use that to inflate your stock price and make your executives rich. And okay, that's a strategy, right? Like I think that's an immoral strategy, but it's a strategy.
But it's what they're paid to do. Like them's the rules.
It's exactly what they're paid to do. But when things don't work out for them, they should go away. Like Cheesecake Factory, Dunkin' Donuts, all these places should have failed during the pandemic. They should have gone away. They should have failed in 2008, 2009. They should have gone away. Instead, we said that cannot be allowed. That is not acceptable. Yet every little we still have empty restaurants and empty storefronts from the pandemic where small businesses, local entrepreneurs were allowed to fail. And and this comes after, 60 years of highways run through the middle of the city and subsidizing the whole highway strip out on the edge to the detriment of the core downtown and everything else that's here. I get where there's a hyper libertarian argument that calls that efficiency, that calls that progress, that calls that a free market. And I can understand how if you bound the idea of free market in a certain price range, you can say, yes, Cheesecake Factory competes with Applebee's, competes with Buffalo Wild Wings, and that's a market. But if you look at actual markets, and I think nature is like the best market to look at. In nature, and I'm going to be quoting Nassim again, in nature, you don't have all sequoias. You have a handful of big players, apex predators that survive. But for the most part, nature is dominated by small incremental players. When the tree falls in the forest, a new tree doesn't just come up. 100 trees come up and they all kind of fight. And over the course of 50 years, you'll have one that takes its place, but then the next one will fall down because it's aged out and it can't adapt. We have created the most unnatural economy that to me, like the most unnatural, distorted economy that we could create. And it's based on this premise, to me, that came out of the Great Depression and World War II, that really has amped up, you could see incrementally with each crisis, the kind of cultural backstop around it. Like we can actually countermand every downturn through monetary policy. And yeah, I think we can, as long as we're willing to sacrifice everything else.
And as long as we can afford the debt service.
Well, I think, let me respectfully say, I feel like I've moved beyond that statement. That's something I would have thought back in 2010.
Oh, good.
I'm at the
help me learn something.
Okay. You might be right.
No, I generally think you're right about the stuff. So I want to know what
I'm of the mindset that we will always find a way to kick the can down the road.
Really?
Yes. Like you say, if we can afford the debt.
Forever?
Yes, because we are willing to sacrifice everybody who's not in the position to kick the can. And, if you want to put like a face to that, like just take Ohio. Like we're willing to wipe out all of Ohio and have a huge percentage of population become drug addicts and have all their cities go bad. And like we did that in the 90s and the early 2000s. And we're like, oh, well, you didn't keep up. And I mean, I think as long as there are winners in a position to do this, I think that we will be, let me put it this way. I am sympathetic to the argument that like at some point the bond market will flare up and tell us you can't do this anymore. But I think that if I were to bet, like if you said, Chuck, your life is going to end when the bond market cannot be corrected anymore, I would say I'll take that bet because I think it would be a long time. I think it would be far longer than the rest of my life because I think that we will. I mean, I've done this series the last like 7 years about the inflation of Christmas cookie ingredients because every year my Christmas cookie ingredients go up by 10, 11%. And the inflation number for bakery goods or for bakery ingredients is like 1%, 1.5%. I'm like, they will lie with statistics. They will, print money when they need to. They will tell us it's raining when they're pissing on your leg. Like I don't think the failure that we will see will come from a top-down reckoning. I think it will come from, in a sense, like a bottom-up revolution. That's my gut.
Well, I hope that I'm wrong about that, and I hope that we do see the revolution rather than the reckoning.
It might just be a matter of sequencing.
Right. I've kept you way longer than the time I asked you for. But if you have a few more minutes,
I'm good.
I would hate to end on the sort of the doomer side and ask if you can share some of your reasons for optimism right now, if you have them. I listened to your great conversation with our mutual friend, Jim Kunstler, a few weeks ago. And I totally love Kunstler. He's the greatest. And I loved y'all's conversation. And I didn't feel like you got to the point in that conversation where y'all were able to trade some reasons for optimism. I'm wondering if we might have that here.
I think like my default position is optimistic these days. That wasn't true in 2008, 2009, 2010 when I started doing this. If I have to say like what that optimism is grounded in, I think it's grounded in a couple things. First, I'm sitting at the middle of a web of thousands of people around North America and increasingly around the world that are, and this might be a little strong, but I don't think so, opting out of the current insanity and saying, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and make my place better. And actually seeing real success at doing that. I feel it is still the beginning of a wave, but I feel like it's a wave nonetheless. And with what we see in terms of like the exponential growth of our movement, the kind of mobilization of thousands of people. I mean, we're up to over 300 different local chapters around North America that are, these are people who are like, okay, we're getting together and we're going to go to City Hall and we're going to go take care of the park and we're going to go basically like rebuild civil society at the local level in the absence of any coherent thing that is doing that. There's so much untapped capacity in this country and there's so many people who are ready to do it that I think all they need is like, often all they need is for us to give them permission. Like, I don't, just go do it. Like, yeah, you can do it. And like, here's someone else did, just copy what they did. Like, go do this. We have created a society where we have a lot of spare parts and unused capacity and people who are underemployed and cast aside and not valued economically even, the guy working at the Walmart that I brought up earlier. These are all people like waiting to do good. And, to me, that well of capacity gives me a lot of optimism. I think the other thing too.
Before you go on to the next one, can I ask you to, I totally agree with that. And I'm particularly excited about Gen Z. I'm particularly excited about young people.
Okay. This is what I was going to say next.
Okay, great. Right.
Because I've got these two kids that are Gen Z, and
nothing makes you optimistic for the future like having great kids.
Yeah. And I'm aware of my own bias in this regard. Are there problems? Yeah, like totally. Do the zombie kids on their phones freak me out? Hell yeah. Does the fact that we teach kids school now on computer freak me out? Yeah, this is not good. But when you actually talk to them, and I mean, my youngest one graduated from high school last year. So I'm kind of out of the active parenting mode where I'm brushing up against all of them all the time. But when you talk to them, they're not dumb. They're very aware of how social media manipulates them. They're very aware of the current political environment. They're very aware of the fact that parts of the system don't work for them and are designed basically for boomers. And really they need to do something different. As an echo of our generation, I feel like, to me, the great thing about our generation is this, the latchkey kid kind of turned into the resilient kid and the resilient adult, and the one who, if you're in a bad situation, you want a Gen X person because they're realists. They'll get stuff done. I feel like as an echo of us, they have a certain amount of that characteristic to them that makes them endearing to me. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to do this. I'm ready to take on. I'm not expecting things to be handed to me. Those generations ahead of us and behind us, the boomers who are kind of biding their time and trying to hang on to let's not let anything change till we exit the stage. And then the millennials, which are really this kind of, I think, intellectual echo, things were easy and then things should be easy. And the millennials, why aren't things easy? And I think both of them, I mean, I've said this many times. If you're not frustrated with the generation ahead of you and you're not bewildered by the one after you, you're probably not paying attention. I think that's probably a common thread throughout modernity. So I have no doubt that if this was two millennials talking, they would have lots of complaints about us. But I find that next generation, that Gen Z, just really to be an optimistic one, and one that I think is practical and ready to roll up their sleeves and deal with problems. And I think they're the exact right people to be hitting, the early part of the workforce right now, because they're resilient, they're scrappy, they're going to try things, they're going to roll with punches, and I like them.
I feel like part of what I'm so excited about for them, for us, is their spirit of bottom up, which is maybe they've lived through, they've been aware and been paying attention through a time when top down so clearly failed. It has so clearly failed that many of them at least seem to just not even concern themselves with they're kind of ignoring the bottom down or the top down, and intuitively are especially interested in making a bottom up revolution.
The interesting thing, these are people who you and I were: Reagan, Bush, Clinton. There was a certain overlay of functionality in the discourse. When you have basically kids who have grown up with the end of Obama, Trump, Biden, now Trump again, it's even the ones that come to me the hyper yimbys that come to me oh, we need the federal government to do this and that. the minute you start engaging with them, they're like, oh yeah, that's really dumb. Like we should be out building this in our city. We should be doing this here. Mm-hmm. And they're very quick to move to what can I do in the place that I live? That is different than millennials. And a lot of the millennials I talk to are really look to the top-down system kind of by default. And I do think that is an echo they've inherited from their boomer parents largely. But it is, I think let me put it this way. And Kevin Klinkenberg has got into this too. I actually think he's an interesting one you should chat with because he's kind of delved into this. I don't feel like I'm a Generation X booster. I don't run around going, Generation X is awesome.
I talked to Kevin, by the way. It's like episode single digits.
Oh, you did. So yeah. Kevin is, I think does a really good job of like describing the attributes of Gen X that makes it like really good for leadership in this moment. Because in a lot of ways we're reluctant leaders, right? Like we're people who will lead if we have to, if things are screwed up, but like we're not like jumping and dying to lead. I feel like that Gen Z echo of our generation, it really has that same mindset. And right now we do just need people who go out and get stuff done.
I feel like that's there, and an additional thing, the generational thing, the tide is sort of coming, in our favor. And then another thing that I tell people about that are younger people who seem concerned, or not concerned is not the right word, but like the challenge is enormous, or feeling a bit overwhelmed with the challenge ahead that we have in making our world a better place for us and our future, is the dialogue. Like that you and I, not that you and I are having this conversation today, because we probably would have had this conversation, a very similar one 20 years ago, or something similar, but that so many people are talking about this right now, that it's like so many people are, whether like there's a thriving YIMBY movement or for a lot of misgivings about it, but or whether there's this interest in regenerative agriculture, or there's a questioning whether, just it seems like we are moving together as a people beginning to move in a really positive direction, as many people are in this period of institutional turmoil. We're losing faith in these people, these institutions that are supposed to come save us, but gaining faith and confidence in a bottom-up revolution.
So let me. I don't think I want to temper that, but let me give a slightly different spin, because I wrote an article towards the end of last year that ran. I can't remember where it ran, but it was about Gutenberg and the idea that we create the printing press, and kind of what we're taught in junior high is create the printing press. You get the Reformation, you get the Enlightenment, you get modernity. It all flows from, the sharing of information. And it's a really nice story, but what it leaves out is like the 100 years of revolution turmoil, and bloodshed and turmoil. Yeah. And like, millions of people killed and wars and like.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I look at today's moment as being, in a sense, similar in that we have this disruptive technology that allows us to communicate without the gatekeepers of the past. The gatekeepers in the Reformation would have been the Catholic Church and, the aristocracy. Today, the gatekeepers are mainstream media and, official government institutions. During the pandemic, it was the National Institute of Health. We're having dialogue now outside of that, and it creates a lot of chaos and a lot of turmoil. I do think there's an open question, and I am optimistic about this. I think what you saw with Gutenberg was this period of intense chaos, and then new institutions forming that were, in a sense, like consensual institutions, like a media, the press, newspapers, You had like certain institutions that formed from a government standpoint. I think that we are in this process of tearing down and reforming. I'm optimistic about the nature of the medium. It's not social media so much, but the idea that we can start, I've got an interest in drumming of this style, with this, you can actually have subgroups of like 5 people from around the country who are interested in the same thing, who can meet regularly and talk about whatever that is. I'm not naive enough to think that this disaggregation of into tiny subgroups can't be manipulated or can't be misused or can't have a big macro overlay that is Orwellian. But I do feel like the institutions that will come out of this chaos are going to, by default, be more bottom up, more democratic, more participatory, and not in a, I show up and give my opinion, but I actually like bring a shovel and a rake and do something. And I think that is a more de Tocqueville kind of America. I think it's a more participatory America. It's a more strong towns America. I think it's just a better place for everybody. But we got to get there first, right?
Yeah. And we will. That seems like a great place to wrap up this conversation. I could talk to you for hours and hours
Likewise.
and hours. Before we officially wrap it up, Chuck, can you share with people where they should find you? I think it should be obvious, but yeah, go ahead.
Strongtowns.org is our main website. And, we tell people plug in on the social media feed of your choice. Like we're on all the major ones. You'll find us. We've got 4 different podcast streams. So if you just type like Strong Towns podcast, you'll get the main podcast that I do, but there's a bunch of other ones. And yeah, if you want to really be in the know, you can sign up for email on our site. We got a really active email list. And if you want to support
if you're in a decent size market or maybe even a very small one, there's probably a Strong Towns group in your town.
Yeah, strongtowns.org/local. It'd be where you would find that. And so there's lots of ways to plug in, and we love people who ready to come to the table with that shovel and start digging.
Chuck, thank you so much. I've loved having this conversation.
Thank you, friend.
I hope to see you soon in person. I don't know when that'll be. It's been too long. All right. My guest today is, what's that?
Well, I was going to say the last time we got together was at your place a couple years ago, which was fantastic.
Yes. We keep wanting to put another one on the calendar, and this is an event my brother and I, with my dad, my late father now, but we produced a few years ago called the Ion Dialogues. And we got some of the greatest people in the world to come and talk about really wonderful stuff. We'll get another one on the calendar. It's sort of, that's in my to-do list.
Well, we'll try not to wait for that.
Okay, good. Yes, I like that. My guest today has been Chuck Marohn of Strong Towns. Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you, friend. Take care.